Well, thank you so much for coming on the show. It's great to finally meet you because this is how we meet each other nowadays, through Zoom. So why don't you tell us a little bit about yourself and your organization and what you're passionate about?
Yeah, sounds good. So my background, engineer by trade, and then got into the sort of the online entrepreneurship world about a decade ago, a little bit longer, and that always sort of revolved around SEO and content marketing. And then that has most recently sort of evolved into how do we know whether or not a writer that we have hired is producing their own created content or AI generated content and passing it off as their own. And that is where we sort of launched Originality, actually over a year ago. So we launched a couple days before ChatGPT launched.
Wow.
Yeah.
Perfect timing. Wow. How did you know? How did you know?
Yeah. So, I mean, I'll see a lot of people like the world of generative AI didn't exist before ChatGPT,
Oh,
but
yeah,
before that,
exactly.
there was GPT-3 and Jasper and GPT-2
It's
even before
exactly 1
that.
year old, according to some people, right?
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. So we've been sort of trying to understand this world for a while, like since the initial like GPT-2 days, and trying to manage that. And so that was sort of what drew us into building Originality, to help people understand whether or not the content that they're receiving and buying is truly original, plagiarism free, and AI generated or human generated, and giving the sort of the power to make that decision into the hands of the person buying the article and buying the
Wow.
content.
That is an amazing task. It's really hard work, and you're doing amazing work. We so desperately need something like this because less and less can be trusted on the internet.
Yeah, I mean, we've done some studies to look at sort of, we're not against AI content. I love AI content. I think it serves a massive purpose. It helps me
Oh,
be
no,
a
no,
better writer.
absolutely.
It's great.
I'm totally with you.
Yeah, but we need to have some understanding on when it is and isn't being used, and to be able to have that control. Otherwise, the societal costs to that are going to be significant. We've seen in some studies that we've done, we've seen 30% of reviews on Capterra was one site that we looked at. 30% of reviews in 2023 were AI generated. And so do we really want to be doing a Turing test every time we go to read a review online to try and tell, was this an AI generated or a human generated review?
Yeah.
I think that's a case of where we're not. I think most people would agree that if we're reading a review, we would like to know that that was a human written review and not an AI generated review.
Yeah, exactly. Because I mean, if you think about it, what's the point of a review period, right? You need a human understanding of the product,
Yeah.
whatever it is that you're proposing. It should be human. So in that case, it's perfectly reasonable to say I want humans reviewing products. But when I'm,
Right.
say, generating a blog post on a particular topic or whatever, that's a completely different story, right?
Yep. Yeah. Fully agree.
Yeah. So you said you were an engineer. So you were like the Scotty in these things. Were you the sort of that engineer for Originality as well, or did you do
No,
engineering
so
beforehand?
dumb mechanical engineer. So no, I
Okay.
geek out on spreadsheets. The AI research team is we have lead AI researcher, and then he's got a team of three underneath him.
Okay. And you were one of the founders of the company, right?
Yeah, correct.
So what drove you to this? Like, did you have like a really bad experience at one point where you bought something that based on reviews and then realized afterwards that they were AI? Like, what was the impetus to start Originality?
Yeah, no. So before this business, I had and we've sold it since, but we had a content marketing business where we would customers would hire us to have writers that would produce content that would then ultimately, with the goal of communicating their brand
Sure.
voice and ranking in Google. Um, and we hadn't had that question, but I could certainly understand that question coming on. Did did this writer use AI to generate this content, or is this human generated content? And at the time, other than a policy, we didn't have any really reliable method to put in place to sort of mitigate that risk of a writer that chose to use AI to assist them in creating the content,
Mhm.
when we had specifically asked them not to, because the company would be afraid of reputational risk. Like, I don't know if you saw the Sports Illustrated news
Oh yeah,
recently
I
that
was all
that
all over that.
Yeah, so I mean they have certainly experienced some reputational damage as a result of AI being used in a way that they probably weren't very happy about. Um, and then there's a risk related to sort of the SEO impact, and how's Google going to view AI generated content. I think it's an existential risk to them. If their search results are just stuffed with AI generated content, then people won't go there. They'll just go to the source of the AI and ask it.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I already do that anyway, but but if you think about it, it's kind of
Yeah,
fitting for us to create, especially in the content marketing space, because we try really hard because they use AI to figure out what to show other people, right? But
right.
we us poor humans, we just have to try and figure out how to dance properly for the machines for them to say, "Oh, okay, this stuff is this stuff is good. Let's pass
Yeah.
it through." So it's almost fitting for us to use AI to fight their AI, but I guess it's not really. I mean, in that particular situation, because you were hiring supposedly humans to generate this stuff and use their expertise to develop this stuff, it made sense for you guys to have that check. So somebody within your organization said, "Hey, we can't tell the difference between this AI and that AI. Let's build a tool to do that."
Yeah, so it was sort of it was our own insight to some extent in terms of like we can't, like, if someone if we can't, like, we put this control in place, but it's just paper. Like, we don't really
Yeah.
have any systematic way of addressing this. And so that was sort of the insight to go and say, great, how can we go and solve this problem, and at the same time build a plagiarism checker. Like, if you have sort of if you're trying to make sure that you have a system that is pushing out 100 or 1,000 quality pieces of content a month, there's certain limitations on existing tools out there related to plagiarism checking and some other sort of making sure the content meets the certain specifications that you put in place for it. So yeah, it was an interesting it's an interesting insight to come at it from the content world, where I think there's a lot of these sort of AI checkers that have sprung up have come from a sort of more academia
Hmm.
focus, which I think has a lot more problems associated with it, and the use of them in that world.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. So you built this checker for internal use, and then you realize, well, this is a problem that a lot of others might have, and that's when you turned it into a product on its own.
So we from the start we launched it as its own product. So we
Oh,
knew
okay.
we knew from the start that it was going to be needed by beyond just sort of the use case of the one company.
Yeah.
That so when we started out, we were starting it knowing that we would have some businesses that were ours at the time that would need this service, but it would be its own entity on its own.
So did you understand at the beginning you were entering into a war with AI?
Well,
It's kind
I
of it's
wish
kind
we
of
had a
like
long.
hackers and cybersecurity people, right? It's like a constant battle. It's like as soon as you get
Yeah.
into it, it's like, okay, you're at one upping, one upping, one upping, one upping, and you're constantly fighting and patching and adding more. You basically started into this war. Now you're on the treadmill of
Yeah, so
this.
we were saying on our morning call today that, like, the last year has been a really long decade. That just
It does
it's
feel a bit like that.
yeah, it's a very sort of exhausting cycle of constantly sort of trying to improve. Like, I think we're on iteration number 25 of the different models that we built.
Yeah.
And some can be more accurate, but then they have an increased rate of false positive, and just trying to optimize for the sort of our core user, on what the thresholds are that they're after, on the type of content that they're after, and the different models that are being used most commonly by our customers, or our customers' writers. So yeah, no, it is a incredibly fast moving world.
Yeah. Well, it's literally very similar to cybersecurity, right? Because you've got
Yep.
on the one side, you've got the hackers trying to continuously do something to break into things. And then you've got the cybersecurity folks on the other side constantly changing their code to match that. So it's a constant battle.
Yep.
So you've jumped into this constant battle between AI generated stuff and being able to detect AI generated stuff. I mean,
Yeah.
this is a long haul thing. So you guys, I'm assuming, are ready for that.
Yeah, no, we know it's gonna be a long haul. Yeah, and I think there's a question on, like, when GPT-20 comes out, is there still going to be the capability to even by that time, the more powerful more powerful AI and
Yeah,
the
it'll be
models that we'll have access
undetectable.
to,
Yeah.
will it be fully undetectable? I don't know. I think there's some strong argument both directions right now. But yeah, no, we know it's a it's it's been a year since it really, like, we're a year and a week, so it was really just like basically a week before.
Yeah.
But yeah, we know it's going to be, it's been fascinating to see, just see the evolution of learning that the world, like our world of customers, has had over that year, and to see, like, and I think I got predicted some things correctly, but predicted some other things massively wrong. And I think it's gonna be really interesting to see, how do I think the world's gonna move, and where's it actually gonna go? And yeah, I've got some theories, but I don't know.
So I'm curious, what went right? Like, what did you predict correctly?
So I predicted that within academia, we had, when we first launched, there was a ton of academia that came to us to say, hey, we need this solution. And
Right.
we're like, it's not perfect. We can't give you, it's not plagiarism checking. It's not, hey, here's the 10 words that were copied and here's where it was copied from.
Yeah.
And academic discipline proof. We knew that wasn't going to be the right use case for our detector. And so we built for the content marketing world, which is the world that we came from and knew. So that we definitely predicted correctly. What I predicted wrong was nobody plagiarizes anymore. Why would you plagiarize when you can just copy and paste from
Exactly.
ChatGPT and
Plagiarism
totally
has disappeared.
Yeah. So I like, obvious in hindsight, but I didn't predict that correctly.
But if you think about it, the whole industry, because there's a whole industry that what spins articles and changes articles so that they get beat by plagiarism, or they beat plagiarism checkers. But now that whole industry has just disappeared because everybody just uses AI to create stuff. So that industry is gone.
Yep. And Moat, like, so Turnitin has installed base across 15,000 institutions, this massive library of previously submitted documents. It'd be crazy to compete with them on a plagiarism checking footing, because they crush you. But they're sort of similarly, their moat has to some extent really dried up, because if plagiarizing is no longer how people are sort of bypassing doing the work themselves, then their power diminishes. So yeah, it has been fascinating to see. I think everyone probably a year ago said this is going to change things, but how those changes would occur has been not exactly as I predicted.
Right. So was there a specific point where you realized this thing was going to fly, or did you know from day one it was going to fly?
Yeah, no, so I would say when I was building this, I thought this was going to be kind of a 3-person, like, okay, when this is needed in this little niche world of content writing, people are using, Jasper at the time was a big company. It had
I remember Jasper. I was a subscriber of Jasper for a bit, but until ChatGPT came along.
Right.
It kind of blew everything else away.
Story. Yes. So it had a $1.5 billion valuation. Like, it was not a insignificant entity. It still isn't. And so I thought it was sort of like, that was the, talk about, like, who are we countering? It was like the people using Jasper that are passing that off as their own work when they're being asked not to. That was who we thought we were sort of. And so we always knew, I would say that I had really high conviction early on that this was going to be something. And then ChatGPT came out, and the world changed dramatically. And so I'd say it was about a month into that where I was like, still telling people, like, hey, have you heard of ChatGPT? And people were still like, no, like, I'm not sure what you're talking about. Like, it's kind of silly. And then I think the uptick starting in the new year, sort of like in that early January, we saw the demand drastically spike, and the number of questions, and people need to really realize that they had to deal with this problem, because there will be companies, there'll be more and more companies like Sports Illustrated that haven't put mitigating controls in place, and they're going to have egg on their face related to AI polluting places where people don't want it to be.
So you didn't really have, it wasn't really hard to pitch what you were doing, because they saw the need and they picked it up.
Yeah.
So you had a lot of incoming as opposed to having to do any outreach.
Yeah, I mean, we have we have outreach happening to certainly we identify our ideal customer. I mean, it's a pretty low price item, so it's hard to have sort of full sales sales motion
Sure.
going with it.
Yeah.
But we have outbound happening, but we do have a big focus on inbound as well.
Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, you're desperately needed what you're doing, because
Right.
it's absolutely a requirement. But you're focusing. So how does it actually work? Do you actually just point it at a URL and go, hey, tell me what this is?
So we have a few different ways to interact with it. So we have sort of the most commonly used method of interfacing with our detector is to go into the app, copy and paste in the content. That's the most commonly used. People can upload a URL. You can upload a list of URLs. You can enter a website and get a complete scan across the whole website. And then we have an API that you can plug into your editorial process. And so that's how a lot of the larger companies work with us, is through that API, working into their existing editorial process.
Cool. And what does it actually do? Does it give you like a score saying, oh, this is like 80% generated by AI, or it's all generated? What's the output look like?
Yeah, it returns a probability. So a probability of that it was AI generated, or probability that it was human generated. So if it's 60%, if it says 60% AI, that means that the RAI is 60% confident that that article was generated by AI. And so what can be sometimes confusing is it doesn't mean that it thinks 60% of the article was written by AI, 40% was written by human. It means that 60% probability that AI was heavily involved in the creation of this content. And then there's highlighting that shows which sections are more likely to have been AI generated versus human generated.
Oh, okay. So you can actually indicate exactly what you think is AI generated compared to what is human generated.
Yeah, kind of. So we do the accuracy. So the longer the text, the higher the rate of accuracy, the shorter the text. And so we have highlighting that is sort of influence that is we have it dialed down to the resolution is as fine as possible, but then the accuracy drops off significantly. Whereas the overall score looks at the entire article, and then that's where we get sort of the 99% accurate on GPT-4 kind of performance, and versus this, like the really small sentence level is far less accurate.
So how do you know? I mean, there's some, obviously when I read something, I can kind of tell it's AI generated, right? There's some indicators that are really, really obvious. And then is that what you're looking for? You're looking for these really obvious indicators of AI, or do you go deeper than that?
Yeah. So what's interesting? So GPT-2 timing, the content was very predictable. GPT-3 even, it was still pretty predictable. But now
Yep.
GPT-4, you can produce, write me a Nobel laureate acceptance speech in the style of Chris Rock, right? And like that was not going to
Exactly.
look like anything else. And so,
and when it balks, you can actually argue with it. Because I told it the other day, it's like write an 800-word blog post draft on X, and it'll go, oh, I can't do anything that long. And I said, well, you've done it before. And it goes, oh, sorry. Okay.
it's really fascinating. And so what it looks at is what we actually don't know all of the factors that it looks at. So
Sure.
There's sort of, we have fed our own AI millions of copies of human content, millions of copies of AI content, as close to sort of, if you were to imagine where, like what human content, like not, there's a ton of libraries that are like old English text. That's not what we're focusing on. Our user case is people that are publishing content on the web, or in books. And so we try and have our data set, human data set and AI data set, as closely look like the content that our users are entering. And then we let our AI run wild on learning to tell the difference between the two. And then every time it completes sort of a training, a training block on learning, we then run it through our testing and validation to see how does it perform on our control data set and other publicly available data sets that others have sort of used as benchmarks data sets for testing detectors. And then that's how we sort of evaluate its performance. But yeah, no, it can be frustrating because people say, well, why did it get tagged as AI? and you know, our answer is we honestly don't know. We don't
Yeah.
know we don't know what our AI has learned to tell the difference between the two, because we certainly can't. You know, humans in most tests, even with trained humans, their capability is 60% at identifying AI generated content versus human generated content.
Yeah.
You know, the simple
The thing
stuff
about
definitely identifiable, but yeah.
the thing that's interesting is that large language models are basically created from what humans have already said anyway, right? So
Right.
detecting it's really interesting. What you're doing is you're detecting the patterns that the LLM is impressing upon what the humans have already written. Because if it takes a piece of text from the, like if you say, write this in the form of Shakespeare or something like that, it could conceivably use a pre-existing text that Shakespeare has written, and your system would probably say, well, that's not AI because it's human written. But
Yep.
then your plagiarism detector would kick in there, right?
I
Wait a minute.
mean, that is the goal. The goal is that it basically, any piece of text, if it gets touched by a black box, by that is like a computer, whether it's be like a paraphraser or you know, any kind of anti-plagiarism, or if you take a human text and then have AI rewrite it, we want our tool to be able to say this is either plagiarized or was created by a machine.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, let's talk about the future a bit, because you intimated a little bit earlier that what will happen when we get to GPT-20 or GPT-5, like 10 or whatever. If we get to those kind of
Yep.
numbers, will it get to the point where it's completely indetectable? And then you're like, well, what am I going to do? Like, how are you guys going to pivot to survive in a world where it gets more and more undetectable?
Yeah, so we don't have investors, and so to answer that question is, I'd say if we are not necessary, like if the societal costs associated with AI generated content are, if you know, watermarking becomes effective, or if the controls get put in place that you know, detection is no longer necessary, you know, be unfortunate from a business standpoint, but I'd be happy that sort of those societal costs are not going to be
But couldn't
experienced.
you pivot to a point where you get even more and more sophisticated? So can't you just stay ahead of the curve, or are you really going to get to the point where you really think it'll get to the point where it's completely undetectable?
I don't know.
Okay.
So I think that if you were to ask me that a year ago, I would have said it's going to get to a place where it's undetectable, because the leap that we saw from GPT-2 to GPT-3 and 3.5 was so massive,
Yeah.
and the detector's capabilities kind of struggled to keep up.
Hmm.
What we have seen with 4 and 4 Turbo is that we have gotten more accurate. We have been accelerating in terms of getting to be more accurate, even though they've been accelerating in terms of the LLM development. And then we also thought, like, we're only accurate on ChatGPT. We've been trained on OpenAI's LLMs. What happens when all these other LLMs that have now come
Yeah,
out,
when you go to
like
Claude and
Llama,
Perplexity and all
Claude,
these others, then I'm
right?
assuming everything falls apart. Have you tried? I'm assuming you've tested those other models as well.
Yeah, extensively, and we are more accurate now on all models than we were when we were just on 3. And
Mm,
so, and that also comes from the AI models that we're building our AI off the back of is also getting more powerful.
mm,
And so, you know, I think there's the sort of the argument that we will continue to remain effective for a long time is that we have closed the gap on existing LLMs, even though they've been exploding across all AI, all LLMs that have come out, Claude, Llama, etc. And most LLMs have consumed the majority of the world's useful content to consume in their current training.
mm.
And there's sort of a debate on whether or not are they going to be able to um, exceed human performance or match human performance. And I don't know that answer. But I've been so far very impressed with our AI research team's capabilities at we haven't been struggling to, we've been closing the gap faster than the new models have been being created.
It makes me think that there's are you seeing, since you are training on all these different models, are you seeing some common pattern amongst all of them, which says, hey, this is obviously AI, and that's something that they can't really drum out of the system?
So for a while we thought that we are one of our most recent. So I think the answer is I think yes. But you know what? One of these sort of we've had these times where like emergent properties have been identified. Like our model was never trained on different languages, but it became very effective at identifying AI in different languages, even though it was
Right.
never trained on different
Interesting.
languages.
Right.
Yeah. So just sort of that one of
So
those
there
like
is
emergent.
something about it that maybe the AI is detecting that maybe even we can't detect, which is great. This is exactly what how it should be.
Exactly. And so, and for a while, we had one model, like when one of our models performance leap, we had a dramatic performance leap,
Whoa.
and we thought
You figured out
maybe
AGI. No.
we thought we identified that OpenAI was watermarking. We thought
Oh,
that because there was a lot of discussion around the time. So that's
yeah.
not the case. But we thought, how can it be this accurate? 99.9 on GPT-4 across a large data set when we'd previously been at like 90%. And so and we're like, it must have, like, for that performance leap to have occurred, we thought they had quietly introduced watermarking but not released it yet, and our AI training on that data had identified it and learned it.
Right.
I don't think that's the case, but that
Right.
was, so that's some of these sort of like sort of fascinating findings that we're seeing. But I think to the question on like, will it continue to be able to perform, and is there some commonality across all these LLMs? And the answer seems to be yes. I mean, a lot of these LLMs are built off the same data sets and the same sort of transformer architecture. And so there is some commonalities across them. And then, you know, similar GPUs that they get trained on. So there's sort of some similarities across them on the like the base architecture of each of them, and you know, data transformers, and that seems to be enough that they all have a similar fingerprint.
So we may actually end up going through another AI winter, because if we get to the limitations of that, we might go, okay, well, LLMs are not the answer to get to AGI. So don't we have to wait to get to for some other breakthrough to occur?
You star.
Oh yeah, it's already out there, right?
It's already out there. That was last week's drama.
Man, I mean, it's kind of like, how do you keep on top of all this stuff? It's like every second something new is going on, and I love it. I mean, this is great. I love to see things moving forward as quickly as they are. But like, I'm concerned about you guys, because it's like you're on this treadmill and you're going to be running faster and faster and faster and faster. But if you see those patterns, if the patterns are there, then it starts getting easier for you, because the patterns will always be there. Once you've nailed down those patterns, you'll always be able to figure out what's real and what's AI.
I think as long as it's like same data set and transformers, it's probably going to have, it's probably going to be hard to have a significantly divergent outcome. No, it is you know, we've instituted a red team with the sole purpose of trying to beat our own detector and bypass our detector, because we felt like we were sort of a little, for a while we felt like we were behind the curve of like someone finding a way to beat us. And then, so now we have our own sort of red team that attempts to sort of stay as cutting edge on the different models, and then using all the different models to try and beat our detector. And if they ever find a strategy that is reasonably effective, we build a data set and train on that.
Nice. Like something every single company should have, but nobody does it. You guys, that's excellent. That's awesome. That's awesome. So this has been great. Thank you so much. If somebody wants to get in touch with you, what's the best way?
Originality.ai, contact form there, or I'm on LinkedIn as probably the best spot.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much. This has been great, and I think you guys are doing fantastic work. Anytime you can bring more transparency into what's going on out there, because there's so much stuff that we have no idea where it's coming from. That it's great. You guys are doing great work.
Awesome. Appreciate it.
Thank you so much. Talk to you later.
All right. Thanks for having me. Bye.